This is the point that we are trying to understand. Today, for the next 40 minutes or so, we'll try to understand the nature of time as given to us by Bhagavatam, given to us by Srila Prabhupada, and given to us by our spiritual masters. And I think it will be a wonderful opportunity for us to try and dwell and contemplate on what time actually means and how time can affect us and how time cannot affect us also. So in this verse, Bhishma Dev has now just met the Pandavas and Krishna, and they all came to see him because he was going to wind down his time. 1, 9, 14, and 15, Bhishma Dev he's actually contemplating loudly about the effect of time actually. I remember when I read these verses with Guru Maharaj, one thing Maharaj pointed out to me was, it's very important to understand that Bhishma Dev was lying on a bed of arrows, and his time was passing actually. And his time to leave his body was also coming very soon. So as he lay there and he observed the Mahabharata war when it came to an end, and when he spoke to the Pandavas now to assure them and to give them solace and strength, how much realized he must be, Maharaj was saying. Because imagine, here's a person who's about to leave his body, and yet, he was not morose, neither was he conquered. Instead, he was so powerful that he could preach to others who were alive, others whose life force was still well within them, like the Pandavas, and he could tell them the great power of time. So Maharaj concluded by saying these prayers or these verses 14 and 15, they are so potent because Bhishma Dev understood the nature of time. And because his whole life, he had always been faced by time, the force of time. Sometimes time is favorable to us, sometimes time is not favorable to us. But if you see Bhishma Dev's life, time was never favorable for him. It was never. Every time, he had an opportunity always to be better than what he was. He could have been king. He could have enjoyed. He could have lived a life of sense gratification. But instead, time was never favoring him. And for all his good intentions, he was always misunderstood, or his greatness was not realized. And even when he gave good advice to people like the Kauravas, they were not taken well. And he had the difficulty and the challenge of being on one side and observing the Lord from the other side because of his duty. So the force of time was very heavy on Bhishma Dev. And that's why when he speaks these two verses, you can come to understand that there is so much realization in what he says. So this is what Maharaj said. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Sarvam Kala Kritam Manye Bhavatam Chayat Apriyam Sapalo Yadvashe Lokho Vayoriva Ganavalihi. I'll read the translation. In my opinion, this is all due to inevitable time, under whose control everyone in every planet is carried, just as the clouds are carried by the wind. Let's hear what Prabhupada has to say in the purport. There is control by time all over the space within the universe, as there is control by time all over the planets. All the big gigantic planets, including the sun, are being controlled by the force of air, as the clouds are carried by the force of air. Similarly, the inevitable Kala, or time, controls even the action of the air and other elements. Everything, therefore, is controlled by the Supreme Kala, a forceful representative of the Lord within the material world. Thus, Yudhishthira should not be sorry for the inconceivable action of time. Everyone has to bear the actions and reactions of time as long as one is within the conditions of the material world. Yudhishthira should not think that he had committed sins in his previous birth and is suffering the consequence. Even the most pious has to suffer the condition of material nature. But a pious man is faithful to the Lord, for he is guided by the bona fide Brahmana and Vaishnava following the religious principles. These three guiding principles should be the aim of life. One should not be disturbed by the tricks of eternal time. Even the great controller of the universe, Brahmaji, is also under the control of time. Therefore, one should not grudge being thus controlled by time, despite being a true follower of the religious principles. Om Ajnanatimmirandasya Jnananjana Shalakaya Chakshurunmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Guruve Namaha. So in this whole verse, very nicely, Bhishmadev and Prabhupada tell us the powerful nature of time. Bhishmadev is trying to console the Kauravas, the Pandavas, because he knows that when they came, they looked very morose, especially Yudhishthira. Yudhishthira Maharaj was feeling guilty that so many millions of deaths and other people who became widows and orphans were the result of him leading the war on the side of the Pandavas. And he was overwhelmed by the carnage and the death and the bloody end to such a terrible war. He was thinking in Mahabharata how just a few months ago, all those people whom we killed were all alive. They were walking, talking, eating. They were behaving very normally. They were smiling at each other. They were embracing each other. They were discussing so many things with each other. And after a few months or few weeks, they were all finished. So if you read Mahabharata, you'll find that this part is explained deeper and elaborately. But now in Bhagavatam, because Bhagavatam takes the essence of how the Pandavas and Bhishmadev reacted to this catastrophe. And so this is what he said. Bhishmadev says nicely, Sarvam Kala Kritam Manye. Sarvam means all this. So in other words, he's saying everything that has happened now that you have seen, the Mahabharat war, the events leading to the Mahabharat war, they were all done not by time. He doesn't say Sarva Kala. He says Kala Kritam. This is very important thing. He says that actually Kala Kritam, if you look word to word, what does it mean? It means done by inevitable time. So the nature of time is given by Bhishmadev within the shloka itself. Time's nature is that it is inevitable. This is the foundational beginning for us to understand time. And that's why in the last line of this purport, Prabhupada makes this point. No one should grudge being controlled by time. Even if you're a true follower of religious principles, the Pandavas were the best followers of Krishna consciousness. Kunti Mata was the best follower of Krishna consciousness. Gajendra the elephant remembered Krishna and prayed so hard. He was Indradyumna Maharaj before that. Chitraketu Maharaj took darshan of Sankarshan and became Vritasur. All these episodes happened to great personalities. And what more to speak of the Pandavas? Bhishmadev in the next verse says so nicely, how wonderful is this influence? So instead of being grudging about it, to be grudging about something means I take offense to it, or I resist it, or I rebel against it. A grudge is like you hold it against someone. Sometimes we don't like something about somebody and we are critical in nature. What happens is every time we see the person, we hold a grudge against them. And sometimes, do you notice how human nature is? When we don't like someone, we can't forgive and we hold the grudge for the rest of the lifetime. So, Prabhupada is saying here time is so powerful that on the platform of time, even planets are being controlled, even the air and the action of the air is controlled by time. You read the whole Bhagavatam. I remember Guru Maharaj telling me that the three modes of material nature, the threefold miseries, the four stations of life, birth, death, old age, and disease, they are all acting out They are functioning on the platform of time. What an important point. They are all acting out their functions. Everything in material nature is acting out its functions on the platform of time. And therefore, in the purport, Prabhupada is explaining that Bhishma Dev starts his discussion. He starts talking to the Pandavas by saying, in my opinion, all that has happened has not got to do with whose fault it is, whether you should feel sorry. Did you play too much a part? Did you play less a part? No. He's just saying that all this is actually Krishna's plan because time is Krishna. And he's saying that even if you don't like it, even you are most pious, even if you are very faithful to Krishna, you should always remember time's nature is kritam. It is inevitable. And not only is time inevitable, the second nature of time is that which is inevitable is controlling everything. That is why it is inevitable. Think about it. That which is inevitable and cannot be avoided because every corner you turn, it is there. That is why it is inevitable. So every corner of our life, the influence of time is there. Now it is 7:19. Influence of time has started running from the time Punya Pragna Prabhu activated the meeting. It is inevitable. And on top of being inevitable, Prabhupada guides us very nicely in the purpose by saying, because we know it is inevitable, because we know it is being controlled, therefore, what should be our reaction to it? Prabhupada says our reaction to it should be that we should not become disturbed by the tricks of eternal time. So nice. In the purport, he says the tricks of eternal time. So this is a very important point that you must remember. And that is why Prabhupada ends the purport by saying, if Brahmaji himself can be under the control of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, then why should we be making noise if for some reason we are also under the influence of time? So time doesn't distinguish between who is in front of it. First is the basic principle we have to understand. Then he goes on to say, how wonderful is the influence of time. Yatra dharma suto raja, gada apanir vikrodara, Krishna stri gandivam chapam, sruhat Krishna tato vipat. And he is pointing to the Pandavas. And because Krishna is there, he pulls Krishna in also. He says, how wonderful is this time? Again, he says, inevitable time. See, if you read the translation to the 15th verse, again, he doesn't say, how wonderful is the influence of time. He doesn't say it. But if you look at the word-to-word translation, the word time and inevitable doesn't come. That is the realization of our founder, Acharya Srila Prabhupada. Because again, Prabhupada is telling us the nature of time is inevitable. And the second thing that's very important in this 15th verse is we find another nature of time. So first nature of time, we find it is inevitable. Why is it inevitable? Because it controls everything, even the actions of the elements. Third, if it is controlling everything, what should we be doing? We should not become disturbed, and we should never bear a grudge against time. When you bear a grudge against someone, you don't accept them for who they are, isn't it? That's common sense, If you bear a grudge against someone, it's because you don't agree with them and you can't accept that this is their nature. But if you do not bear a grudge, then you accept their nature. And in acceptance, there is peace. In expectation, there is always anxiety. So the word inevitable means, the purport to the word inevitable means that we should not expect that time should go the way we want it to go. And that's why we should not bear grudge against time. And he's giving the example here, the evidence. He's saying, look at the Pandavas. The Pandavas were the great, great souls. Yudhishthira Maharaj, the son of the demigod controlling religion. Bhima, the great fighter with a club. Arjuna, whose bowman skills were unsurpassed. Mighty weapon Gandiva. And Krishna himself was there, as the direct well-wisher. And even then, you all suffered so much. If the Pandavas could go through so much, then what about us? That's why we should not bear grudge. And that's why Prabhupada, Bhishma Dev introduces another quality of time. It is irreversible. Very important point. If you look at the translation to the 15th verse, another quality of time is given. Time, you cannot rewind time. Now 723 is there, and within 2 minutes or 1 minute, 723 is gone. And then 724 is gone. And no matter how much money you pay, Prabhus and Matajis, you will never get it back. Never get it back. That which is irreversible, the implication of irreversibility is that we must consider what we have very precious. Isn't it true? If you know something that you have cannot come back because it will leave, how much more precious it becomes. That is the understanding of the impact that irreversible nature of time should have on devotees. It's very important. And the last line of this purport is very important in Prabhupada's purport on the 15th chapter. I'll read to you. It's in the middle. I'll start in the middle. Despite the power of pious acts, the power of personalities, the power of expert management, and the power of weapons under the direct supervision of Lord Krishna, the Pandavas suffered so many practical reverses, which can only be explained as the influence of Kala, inevitable time. And Prabhupada ends in the last two lines, giving us very, very important instruction. Kala is identical with the Lord himself, non-different from Krishna. And therefore, the influence of Kala indicates the inexplicable wish of the Lord himself. This we must ingrain in our heads. Whatever that we get according to time, it is actually the wish of the Lord. Whether it looks bad or whether it looks good, as a devotee, if we accept what time we are going through, and if we dedicate that time to Krishna, then that is the expert way in which we receive time. Because time equals to the wish of the Lord. And this wish of the Lord is described by Prabhupada as inexplicable. Inexplicable means we cannot understand, but we have to accept. We don't know how it comes, but we have to accept. Did anyone know that this condition would come like that with this virus? It started very small somewhere in China, and we thought, China is in trouble. Before we know it, Singapore was in trouble. And then Singapore was feeling all right. Then the rest of the world was in trouble. And then we've now, in Singapore, we're experiencing a second wave, and everyone's on lockdown. And then we realize every day that's going by, people are not earning monies. Suddenly, everything that was running very well is just collapsing. This is inexplicable. We could not understand it. We could not see how it was coming, but we can understand it is the wish of the Lord as experienced through the agency of material nature. So then, how should we accept the inexplicable nature of time? We have heard about irreversible. We have heard about, what's the other word we heard? Inevitable. So inevitable is there, irreversible is there. And then now we understand that time is so powerful that it is irreversible. All three are I's, isn't it? And those who understand time is irreversible, they consider time precious. We will not waste time. Wasting time is a crime, isn't it? Maharaj told us. And that is why we must not waste time. And if we understand something is inexplicable, this is the next I, isn't it? Then Prabhupada says in the last line of text 15, the purport, there is nothing to be lamented when a matter is beyond the control of any human being. Such a nice point. There is nothing to be lamented when a matter is beyond the control of any human being. This is a very important point. Otherwise, Maharaj warned us that we have this habit, that when time comes, either we bear grudge against what is happening and we cannot accept it. And when we can't accept it, we are in anxiety. And because we don't see Krishna's hand, we go against Krishna. because time is Krishna. Time is the inexplicable wish of the Lord. And if we bear grudge, then we are bearing grudge against Krishna. So this is a very important point. Again, it goes back to the idea of how we should accept time. And you see that to accept time, it is important to appreciate the nature of time. And that's why here, very nicely in this verse, the nature of time has been given. Now, before we try to conclude on these nice points, there are also certain characteristics of time. We spoke about the nature of time, but there are also effects of time that Bhagavatam gives us, which is very important for us to consider and to meditate upon. The first thing that Bhagavatam tells us, especially it is found in the purport of the third canto, 26th chapter, 16th verse. 3, 26, 16. In that purport, it is very nicely given that time causes fear of death. This is the great power of time. Prabhupada writes in the purport there, the fear of death is the action of Kala, or the time factor. And the time factor represents the influence of Krishna. So time is Krishna, and it is also the influence of Krishna. And Prabhupada says in that purport, time is by nature destructive. And it is true. Whatever that you create is always subject to destruction, isn't it? Or it is subject to deterioration. And that is the action of time. Because time is the representation of the Lord. But Prabhupada gives us a very practical point for us. If we know that time is destructive, then we will understand, and it reminds us that we must surrender to Krishna. So Prabhupada ends the purport by saying, if you do not accept the time factor as Krishna, then what happens? You will always live fearfully in this world. What a beautiful point. If you do not accept the time factor as the Supreme Personality of Godhead, then you will always live in fear. What fear? The fear of death, or the fear that something that you have will go away. But if you live in this world accepting that time is Krishna, and when Krishna takes something away, you will accept it because Krishna is the Supreme Lord. He's free to do what he wants. Another nice verse that I remember Guru Maharaj giving us, and I can share it with you, is 3:29:37. When Maharaj was in the council flat for a month after his stroke, he dedicated so much time to the study of time, because he told me that after my brush with stroke, it was actually a brush with time. And after I came out of it, I committed myself to studying exactly, even deeper, the nature of this time. So during that time, he spent a lot of time looking at verses which had to do with time. And this is one verse he gave, 3:29:37. And in 3:29:37, when you have time, you can read the translation. But the point of the translation that is important is time factor causes transformation of all material manifestations. So this is another nature of time. Time always causes everything to transform. But it is another feature of Krishna. And those who do not know that time is Krishna, what happens? They become afraid of the time factor. This is a very important point. They become afraid. I can still hear some devotees speaking. If you are speaking, then you have to mute it. So this time factor is actually considered to be frightening for people who don't know and don't accept transformation. You see the point? So Prabhupada writes in that purport, a devotee who knows time is Krishna, he has nothing to fear from the influence of time. And Prabhupada tells us that by the influence of time, so many forms are changing. This is very important for us. We may say, Prabhu, we are actually, followers of Krishna. So for us, death is not so much of a problem. When death comes, we'll handle it. We'll surround ourselves with devotees and chant. But there is another fear in this world which is even sometimes greater than death. It is the fear of change. And if you read that verse, Rupa Bedaspadam is the word that Prabhupada tells us to look at. We are always afraid that forms are changing. Prabhupada gives the example, when a child is born, his form is small. But in course of time, the form becomes larger. And very often, everything is changed and transformed. And because we become attached to a particular form, when the form changes, we become anxious. And Maharaj told me this transformation of form affects us most in relationships. You realize that not only do material objects in this world change according to the power of time, but our relationships also transform. Sometimes they transform very nicely, but very often they transform in a retrograde fashion. Why? Because transformation in this material world is actually deterioration. Please remember that. Transformation in this material world is always deterioration. The only thing in this material world that transforms in a way that doesn't deteriorate is your bhakti. Bhakti keeps being added on in a stockpile, but everything else deteriorates. This proves that bhakti is never affected by time. Na karhinchin madparaha shantarupe nang shanti no me nimishole diheti. This verse is sung by Kapila Dev to Devabhuti. And he says very nicely to her, my dear mother, please remember that this opulence of devotional service can never be affected by two things. It cannot be affected by weapons of any kind, and it cannot be affected by time. So, irreversible nature of time, inevitable nature of time, all these different natures of time, they cannot affect bhakti. Otherwise, you see, if your relationship does not have bhakti in the middle, even that relationship will deteriorate. But a relationship that always has bhakti in the center, that relationship always grows. Take the relationship with our spiritual masters. When we follow the orders of our spiritual masters, our relationship with him always grows. When we do not follow the orders of the spiritual master, we transform, but our deterioration in bhakti begins. Why? Because we have actually not followed his instructions. And therefore, instead of being under the nature and shelter of spirit, we have pushed ourselves into the nature and into the nature of what we call matter. And the moment something becomes material, it must deteriorate. This is very important. And that is why, even above the material modes of nature, Kala is very strong. Even if you do something temporarily beneficial in this world, you'll notice one thing. All good projects eventually become frustrated, either by death or by something. The only thing that's possible to be done here is to get rid of time. Bhagavatam says time is known as Kala Sarpa. Sarpa means cobra snake, and the bite of the cobra is always lethal. No one can be saved from the bite of the cobra, Prabhupada says. The only remedy out of the cobra-like Kala, he says very nicely, the cobra-like Kala is to perform bhakti. There is no other way. But by becoming aware of the nature of time, we then value time. So time has capacity to destroy everything. Time has capacity to transform everything. And eventually, time also has the capacity to end everything. Sometimes Maharaj told us the good news about time is that if you're suffering, it will end. And the bad news about time is if you're having a very good time, it must also end. In the last verse of the 29th chapter, I forget now what is the text, but the last verse of the 29th chapter, Kapila Dev ends his discussion on time very emphatically to his mother. He says, Mother, Sa Ananta Antakaraha Kala, Anadir Adi Krit Avyaya, Janam Janena Janayan, Marayan Mrityu Antakam. This verse also Guru Maharaj liked very much. The eternal time factor has no beginning and no end. That's the nature of time. Time and this material world is absorbed into Mahatattva at the end of this material manifestation. And then again it is manifested. So in one sense, it has no beginning or end. But now you hear what Kapila Dev says. It is the representative of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, the maker of the criminal world. So Prabhupada actually translates this world as criminal. You know why he says it's criminal? It's criminal because anyone in this world is basically a criminal. We are in jail, you know. That's why we are criminal. And we are criminal because we have not accepted time as Krishna. And that is why we are in difficulty. That's why we are moros. A good example of that in Bhagavatam was Vidura meeting Dhritarashtra. Vidura conquered time because of bhakti, but he came back to help his brother cross and surmount time. How did he do that? He did that by being straightforward with his brother about the nature of time. He said very nicely, what's that verse? Evam graheshu saktanam, evam graheshu saktanam pramattanam tad ihaya. Atyakramat. Atyakramat means to overtake. Atyakramat avinyataha. How? In an inconceivable, inexplicable manner. Kalaha paramadushtaraha. The translation to this verse is important. It's in the first canto, 13th chapter, 17th verse. 1, 13, 17. And how does Vidura introduce time to Dhritarashtra? He tells him, my dear brother, time is insurmountable. That's another I word. Insurmountable, irreversible, inevitable, insurmountable, amazing. It's all I. You can't cross time. And this insurmountable time is eternal. The same point that's being stated by Kapila Dev. It is eternal, but it is imperceptible. Another I. It is imperceptible. You don't know, you can't perceive what happens. Therefore, because it is imperceptible, it overcomes you. It overtakes you. Like a car on a highway so fast, you don't know when it overtakes you. Sometimes you are just walking down the road and you don't know, someone just runs past you. That's Atyakramat and Avinyataha. But then Vidura gives us a clue. Time can surmount us. Time can be imperceptible, but it can only happen to those who are too much attached to family affairs and too much engrossed in thoughts of material sense gratification. Family affairs doesn't mean now we drop everything and walk away from our family. Anyway, you can't walk away anyway. Whatever happens, you are stuck with your family. But the point is that being in a family is not in itself wrong. But Dhritarashtra was so attached to the concept that everything belonged to him that even after the Kauravas died, Kauravas gone. All the allies of the Kauravas were gone. Nobody was left. He wasn't even king. But Maharaj said, even when he realized he was not king, he didn't realize it because he refused to accept the insurmountable power of time. So what did he do? He sat on this throne that wasn't a throne. And that's why Vidura came back to mock him. My dear brother, you're sitting on a throne, but you're a dog. You're not even the king, but you're living off the Pandavas. These were the same people you tried to kill. And today you have to beg them just to sit on a throne. Your liver is weak, your eyes are already blind, your teeth are going, you can hardly hear, and yet you think that I have everything. Why? Because I have this throne. And this is what Bhagavatam means by being attached to family affairs. It is an extension of our false ego. And if we are always engrossed in thinking that which we have, I must hold, then time will cut us. If you read this verse 1, 13, 17 purport, Prabhupada starts amazingly. Prabhupada gives us the idea of how we become attached to material things. Prabhupada says, I am now happy. I have everything in order. My bank balance is quite enough. I can now give my children enough estate. I am now successful. To a poor beggar outside, they are depending on God, but they come to beg from me. And therefore, I am more than the Supreme Lord. But in this situation now, who is really happy? Everyone is not in a state of order. Everything is in a state of chaos. I don't know how your bank balance is, but if 2, 3 months goes on like this, we won't have a bank balance. And can we give children enough estate when we have nothing? And do we really say and claim that we are successful? And that's why we are living in a criminal world. Despite not owning anything, we are like thieves, thinking that we own everything. And so Kapila Dev in 3:29:45, he says very nicely that this world will eventually dissolve. It dissolves not only this universe, but even the superintendent of death, Yamaraj, will also have to be dissolved. And Prabhupada writes, even the devatas who live so long will eventually have to be dissolved by time. But Prabhupada ends the purport, and we can wind down our time together by remembering one thing that will exist eternally, Prabhupada says. Prabhupada says, a devotee does not desire anything in this material world. Because he knows if he does desire for something here and we become attached to it, atyakramat avinyataha, it will be overtaken by time. So what does he desire? A devotee learns to cultivate one desire. Somehow or another, let me serve Krishna and let me serve the devotees. And Prabhupada says, this servitude exists eternally. The Lord exists eternally. His servitor exists eternally. And the service exists eternally. So Maharaj told me at the end of this purport that you should write down that 4 things will never be affected by time. The first is service to Krishna and his devotees will always exist independent of time. Second, the Lord will always exist independent of time because time is just a feature of Krishna. In fact, if you read Kunti Mata's prayers, I forget which verse, Prabhupada writes that time is actually a Paramatma feature of Krishna. Because Paramatma sits in that heart and he witnesses everything across time. Therefore, time is a feature of Paramatma. Such a nice point. Huh? And then, Prabhupada saw 4 things. First is the servitude. The servitude will exist. In other words, this servitude mood of desiring to Krishna, desiring to serve Krishna and serve devotees, this mood Krishna will never take away from you. So if you desire always to serve Krishna, rest assured, Krishna will never allow time to take it away from you. But you must work hard to keep this servitude. Second, Krishna exists eternally. So there's no question of Krishna leaving us. The third thing that will never be taken by time is you, the servitor. Now, sometimes people say, I'm going to die. We may die with the sharir, but our spirit soul exists. And the spirit soul is the servitor. And the Lord is the served. So we are all servants of the Lord. And the good news is, in whatever form Krishna decides we have to come back in, whether in this world or in another world, rest assured that because of the platform of your servitude and your service attitude, that's what servitude means. Servitude means service attitude, right? If your service attitude is good and it is pleasing, Krishna allows you to carry that servitude into your next life, like all of Bhagavatam was there, and continue. So even though Gajendra struggled 1,000 years with the force of time through the force of the network of the crocodile, because of his stock of devotional service and servitude as Indradyumna Maharaj in previous life, Krishna did not hang him out to dry. Krishna exists eternally. The service attitude of Indradyumna Maharaj got transferred to the body of Gajendra, but soul was the same. And Krishna is eternal. And therefore the soul is the servitor. And he exists eternally. And finally, Prabhupada says the 4th item, the service that you do, it will always exist eternally. So whatever service you're doing for Krishna today, even the smallest looking service, picking flowers maybe from your garden. I'm sure Punya Pragna Prabhu, I remember your garden, you must have some flowers there. So you're lucky. Here we don't have flowers now. To get flowers is very difficult because everything is a lockdown. But if you have flowers at home and you just lovingly pick it up, that flower becomes your service. You become the servitor. Krishna exists eternally, so you can always offer that flower. And this service attitude will exist eternally. Four beautiful things that can never be touched by time. How wonderful is that? So, should we be moros? That's our question now as we conclude. No, we should not be moros, because our life should be used in the service of Krishna. And that's why, if we use our life in the service of Krishna, time doesn't touch us, because at the end of this life, what happens is we go back to Krishna, or we go back to wherever our spiritual master is in the spiritual sky and continue serving him. And that way, we have come out of the influence of time. So that's why Shukadev Goswami, in the second canto, first chapter, in the 12th verse, he says very nicely a point to Parikshit Maharaj. And he's asking a question which we should ask. O king, what is the value of a prolonged life which is wasted? So nice. Everyone wants time because they want to prolong it. But Bhagavatam is asking a different question. The paradigm is different. Bhagavatam says you may have time, but what if your time is prolonged and it is wasted? What if it is inexperienced by the years in this world? And Shukadev Goswami concludes by saying, better a moment of full consciousness, because that gives one a start in searching after his supreme interest. So actually, we are not worried whether we live 80 years or 50 years. Prolonged time has no value to us. But in that time, how are we using it for Krishna is important. And if you use it for Krishna well, then time becomes your friend. Ayuhu harati vaipumsam udyan astam chayan asau tasya arte yat shano nita uttama shloka vartaya. This verse in 2:3:17 is the seminal verse, because it tells us that while the sun is rising and setting every day, and we are now one day old, and it decreases the duration of everybody's life, the devotee's life is not reduced. Ironically, because he's using time for Krishna, eventually he uses time for Krishna. And therefore, even though he grows old, even though he may become diseased in the present life, because he's used it for Krishna, that disease, that deterioration, it doesn't affect his consciousness. Why? Servitude exists eternally. Servitor exists eternally. Service exists eternally. So why are we worried then? All these four items exist eternally. So we have nothing to worry. That is why those who use time for Krishna, Krishna always gives them time. Let's not forget that. Krishna is time. He can withdraw it from you, or he can give it to you. I remember His Holiness Radhanath Maharaj said something very nice. He said that the devotees are so busy, but because they are busy for Krishna, they have the most time actually free in their hands. What an amazing point. Devotees are considered so busy because they are engaged with Krishna. Yet they are always free to take on more and more services. Why? Because Krishna prolongs time for the devotee. He doesn't want it, but because he's using it for Krishna, Krishna gives it to him. This is the beautiful point. So we must remember, the Lord will never rob the devotee of the value of time. The Pandavas, Bhishma Dev, Lord never took time away from them in such a way that their service was affected. No. In fact, the Lord gave them just enough time to always remember Krishna. And they used it well for the good Lord. So this is very important. A devotee's old age or disease in the present life is but an impetus to such guaranteed eternal life. This is very important. Vritrasu's life was coming to an end, but he didn't care. He didn't hold a grudge against Krishna. No. In fact, he said that I am doing my duty, and Indra, you please do your duty. All he prayed for, that somehow or another he should be given an opportunity to remember Krishna and to serve him. That is how time is. So to conclude, we must also remember one more feature of time which is very practical. When time is not in our favor, we must accept it, because it is Krishna. Krishna says in Bhagavad Gita, Kalosmin, I am time. And when Arjuna refused to fight and kill anyone, Krishna told him, whether you kill them or whether you think you're killing them or not, they are going to die because I am time. But if you become instrument in my hands, then you will benefit because you become a servitor of the Lord. Very important. So we must understand as devotees that acceptance of time and how it runs is a very important component of devotional life. And in Bhagavatam, two great personalities showed us how to accept time. The first is the Lord Himself. In the eighth canto, sixth chapter, I think in the 19th verse, 8:69. That is the episode, when the churning of the milk ocean was there, if you remember. And in the churning of the milk ocean, you find that before the Devatas could go to churn the milk ocean, they actually pray to Krishna. And Krishna is the one who tells them to go and churn. But before he says that, he actually tells them a very important observation. He says that at this moment, you are not flourishing. And therefore, you should make a truce with the demons and the asuras. Because now time favors them. And why is it that time can favor asuras? Because sometimes, because of the stringent laws of nature, sometimes the asuras may have some pious credits from previous lives. And they are just using the credits now. Even asuras once upon a time could have been good people. Maharaj said everyone is an asura and a devata today, depending on which part of you is going to come. Do you wake up an asura or do you sleep a devata? Some days, in one day, you can become asura for 1 minute and devata the next moment. I'm sure we would have seen all this in our lives. Sometimes people say, are you the same person? So this point is very deep. Krishna is telling us that time doesn't favor anyone because time is Krishna. And do you know what is Krishna's nature? Another eye. He is impartial. So many eyes today. He's impartial. And because he's impartial, time is also impartial. Time will reward and time will punish. And we must be prepared for that the moment we take this sharir. So the demons, their time was coming. And Krishna advised the devatas, you are not flourishing. When you are not flourishing, the smart thing is to make truce with the demons. And after making truce with them, very important, he said, make truce with them and together you go and churn the milk ocean. And by making truce with them, you are flowing with time. And in due course of time, he says very nicely, you will achieve what you set out for. This is how Krishna expertly is showing us how to handle the force of time. Another example and final example today is actually Bali Maharaj. In the 8th canto, 21st chapter, from the 19th verse, 20th verse, 19 and 20 verse, very important. These two are very important. And then I think you can find 21 and 22, 4 verses. In these 4 verses, Bali Maharaj also shows us how to handle time when it is not in our favor. At that moment, if you remember, Bali Maharaj was supposed to grant Vamandev 3 steps. He only could do 2 because Vamandev became very big and there was no place to put. So Bali Maharaj then realized that actually Vamandev is his arch enemy Vishnu. And when his demon friends all saw that the arch enemy Vishnu had come to cheat their king Vamandev and take away, to cheat their king Bali Maharaj and take away all that belonged to them, they took up arms and they prepared to fight. And at that point, when they were ready to fight, what does Bali Maharaj tell them? He says, O Viprachitti, O Rahu, O Nemi, these are all his friends, all demons' names. Please hear my words. Don't fight. Stop immediately, for the present time is not in our favor. Then he goes on to say, O Daityas, he's now talking to his friends. By human effort, no one can supersede the Supreme Personality of Godhead, who can bring happiness and distress to all living entities. By human effort, we cannot supersede what Krishna wants. We may intend, but Krishna superintends. Then he goes on to the next verse, 8:21:21. He says, the supreme time factor, which represents the Supreme Person, was previously in our favor and not in favor of the demigods. But now that same time factor is against us. And he ends by saying something we should remember. No one can surpass the time representation of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. By material power, by the council of ministers, by intelligence, by diplomacy, by fortresses, by mystic mantras, by drugs, by herbs, or by any other means. That's 9. 9. You can try 9 things that you try very often in this material world, but every single one of our attempts will be thwarted. Why? Because Krishna is the eternal time factor, and he will defeat all of this. And so, what did Bali Maharaj do? Instead of, as our first purport said, instead of bearing a grudge against Vamandev, instead of bearing a grudge against time not being with me, what did he do finally? He accepted his fate. He bowed his head and he told Krishna as Vamandev, please put your last foot on my head. And that is when he became bound by Garuda. That is when he became bound. And Maharaj told me the point when Bali Maharaj became bound, it was not a signal that he was being bound by the material life. When he was bound by a devotee Garuda, he was actually being bound to the lotus feet of Krishna. When we accept time, Krishna binds us to him. He gives us protection, even though we don't see it. But he's always protecting us. But what does Krishna protect? 4 things. He protects your service attitude. He protects your servitor, you, as this person who's serving. He will always protect your service. And he will always protect your ability to always be connected to him. These are the 4 things that Krishna will protect. Jai Grantaraj Srimad Bhagavatam. Jai Srila Prabhupada. Jai Srila Gurudev. Anantakoti Vaishnavrinda ki. Jai Chennai Yatra ki. Hare Krishna. That's all I have. I hope there are realizations and some wonderful points you can share with me that you have read and heard about time. There's so much more actually. Thank you, Punya Pragya Prabhu.
Prabhu, one by one, Prabhu. One by one. One by one.
Maybe I'll mute myself, then easier for you.
You can just unmute
If anyone wants to ask a question, they can ask. I have unmuted everybody. Please, one by one.
I can't hear you.
Krishna Prabhu,
Sorry?
Hare Krishna Prabhu, Sri Narayan Das.
Oh, Hare Krishna. Very nice to hear you, Prabhu.
Dhanavad Pranams Prabhu. Prabhu, one quick question and partial realization. Like in terms of the time, how do we relate and identify Krishna when he talks more in the Bhagavad Gita 10th and 11th chapter when he shows his different.
You're asking about how does Krishna um, speak about time in Bhagavad Gita, Prabhu?
Yeah, in the specifically in the 11th chapter, he says that before he sees everybody entering the mouth of the Supreme Lord.
I can't hear you, Prabhu. I only hear a little bit.
Just the villages on the 11th chapter, specifically on the Vishnu.
You're speaking about Krishna's representation of time, the way Krishna is speaking in the 11th chapter.
Yes, yes, yes.
Well, I quoted a verse briefly. I think it is from the 11th chapter. That's that famous verse, I think, in 11:32. Is the destroyer of everything, and nothing will survive. I think it is Kalosmin Lokashaya Krit Pravridro. Lokan Samahartum Iha Pavritta. Ritepi Twam Na Bhavishyati Sarve. Ye Avastita Prati Anikeshu Yodaha. So, this is the seminal verse in Bhagavad Gita where Krishna tells that time I am, and I am the great destroyer of the worlds. I've come here to destroy all the people. With the exception of you, everyone will be slain. So time was on the side of the Pandavas, meaning Krishna was on the side of the Pandavas. And he was an all devouring giant in the form of the universal form. And he indicated to Arjuna that even though it appeared as if he was so powerful and Arjuna was so fearful, at the end of the day, even if Arjuna decided not to fight, Krishna, as the power of time, would proceed anyway because time cannot be checked. So it was better for Krishna to actually to advise Arjuna and instruct him that instead of going against what time wishes, and that is what I wish, meaning Krishna, that you should flow with me and you become an instrument. That's why 1132 precedes 1133. In 1133, he tells Arjuna very clearly, get up now. Uttishta is not only to get up physically, but to wake up, because Uttishta means you wake up. You wake up now and realize that whether or not you are going to kill someone or you're not going to kill someone, the main point is, I have a plan. And Mayaya Vaite Nihata Purvam Eva. This is in 1133. So, by my plan and arrangement, everyone who must die has already died. How is this possible? On the platform of time. But time favors my devotee now. So you become Nimitta Matra, Bhavya Savyasachi. And notice the word Savyasachi, Prabhu. Savyasachi means one who's very expert in shooting. And so what Krishna was telling Arjuna, you may be very expert with your Gandiva bow, but if I have plans, then that bow can be used. Because in the 15th chapter of the first canto, the same Arjuna is speaking that I have the same bow, the same chariot, the same Gandiva. I'm the same Arjuna. But time has passed for my potency. And by the force of time and by the grace of Krishna, he has taken it away. That also is because of time. So when you look at the way time runs, you find time is very often the platform on which Krishna enacts his plans. And we can either go with it, or if we go against it, then we will have to suffer according to the stringent laws of material nature. I couldn't hear you so much, but I'm just speaking my whatever I can remember from this particular verse, Prabhu. I hope it's useful.
Yes, yes. Yes, Prabhu. Thank you very much, Prabhu. This is what just I wanted to hear.
Thank you,
very
Prabhu.
much. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna, Prabhuji. Prabhuji, you said no that in your statement, true Krishna says truce with the demons during the churning of the ocean. How does it imply in today's world? Because if you notice, every second person we meet will be having some sort of demonic nature. In such circumstances, how do we know, or how do we try to analyze the situation, and what should we do in such situations?
Very good question. One thing I'd like to share with you also is that what you say is correct. Every one or two persons whom we meet, are possibly they have some demonic nature. But we should also recognize that while we meet others with some demonic nature, we also have some demonic nature. So that's first thing that's very helpful for us, because it is stated in Shastras that it takes a thief to know a thief. And sometimes what we see as demonic in others is also a projection and a reflection of what we have, because we are able to recognize it. But having recognized it, what we do about it is very important, as you correctly said. And the important thing is, in the episode of the churning of the milk ocean, you'll find that Krishna actually told the Devatas that time is not on your side. You can't get Amrit on your own. You will have to work with these people. But then, even while working with them, Krishna took it upon himself to make sure that he was protecting the Devatas. He was always fanning their enthusiasm. And the Devatas, being naturally devotees of the Lord, were protected from the demonic association by account of one instruction that they followed. Krishna said, you must declare a truce and you have to work with them, because it is inevitable. And in our lives, whether we like it or not, Mataji, we have to work with people who are not devotees. And if we don't work with them, we are really fortunate. Maybe your own business and you only have devotee association, but that's really rare. So Bhagavatam presents that very practical point that in between that Vasuki and the Mount Mandara were two different sets of personalities. But they were churning the same Mount Mandara. They were in the same milk ocean. They even had the same objective, because they were supposed to get Amrit. But one of them followed the instructions of Krishna, and the other one didn't bother to follow the instructions of Krishna. So the instruction of Krishna was, when Amrit comes, before Amrit comes, do one thing. Before Amrit comes, you will see many other things coming up. And when they come up, don't be distracted by them. That was his first instruction. And they stuck to it. And because they were not distracted by them, Mataji, they were protected from the association or the demonic influence and nature of the other end, the asuras. The second instruction that protected them was actually, when Amrit comes, you please don't become so mesmerized by Amrit that you run after it. They may even take it, but have faith that it will come to you in due course of time. And even when the Amrit came, the Devatas were feeling, I want to get it, But they held back because they remembered Krishna. And these two, remembrance of his instructions, became a shield for them, so that while they were in the vicinity of demonic forces, they were eventually not touched by them. Does that help, Mataji?
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
Dandavat pranams Devi Prabhu. This is Narahari Das.
Narari Prabhu, Hare Krishna.
Prabhu, just one small point. You are referring that 1132 verse, Kalosmi. When the first nuclear weapon was tested, there was a German scientist, open humor. After the testing was done, he came out and he gave the interview to the press. He quoted this particular verse, Kalosmi, and also he quoted the other verse from 11th chapter. If thousands of suns come at one time, it will be like the effulgence of Krishna. He said, I am reminded of these two verses from Bhagavad Gita, but this nuclear, if it is used against humanity, it is going to cause mass destruction. He said that. And now also, the place where it is tested, it's called the Trinity Center. And they have a board in which these two verses of Bhagavad Gita are engraved till today.
Amazing. I just wish they paid heed to the verses. But at least they put the verses there. Something better than nothing.
Yeah, so
But it's a nice point, too.
yeah, so 1 week after this, the Hiroshima and Nagasaki were bombed after this interview.
Yes, yes. Thank you for sharing that, Prabhu.
Yeah.
I want to end by just assuring everyone that we should not grudge time, and we should not grudge the living entities also, because each living entity is being challenged by time. Don't hold anything against people, Maharaj told us. Even with your God brothers, sisters, devotees in the movement, don't hold anything. Until you are in their shoes, Maharaj said, you don't know what they suffer. Everyone is defective, because that's why we are in the material world. But instead of wasting time contemplating on they are this way, they are that way, why this, why that, use your valuable time. Someone here quoted 4:24:66, and it's so true. Lord Shiva says, in due course of time, the Lord will strike, in the form, just like a snake seizes a mouse. In that same way, while we're wasting valuable time bearing grudges against time and bearing grudges against each other in this world, let's put that aside and concentrate on Krishna. Don't ever forget that whatever suffering you are going through on the platform of time, be assured someone next to you is also going through it. Maharaj told us without exception, the living entities are suffering. And therefore, we should develop compassion and we should not hold any grudge. If we hold grudge against Krishna in the form of time, then how much we will hold grudge against living entities also. So we should be very careful to understand time in its entirety, and we should understand what we should do with time. And you all are using it in the best way. And I'm very grateful to be given the time to spend this time with you. It is irreversible. It has left us. It cannot be taken back. It is inevitable. It will go through now. Time will pass, and it has passed. And in all these ways, it will just overtake us always. But if we are with Krishna, like Vidura was, then he can also give association to Dhritarashtra. And then each one of us has a duty to give association with whatever time we have to the next person and give them Krishna, give them sadhu sangha. And in that way, even in the most difficult of situations, sadhu sangha will help us through everything. Thank you very much. Please forgive me for any offenses, and please keep me engaged always. Hare Krishna. Punya Pragna Prabhu, I take permission to leave now.
Okay, Prabhu. Thank you very much for your kind association. It was a very nice class.
No, I'm very happy. The funny thing, Prabhu, is as you're talking, I keep thinking I'm addressing everybody in your house
Yes.
because I'm so used to having a program there, and I thought, oh, it could be there, and then I realized everybody's in their own house, so doesn't matter. Time also will pass now, and
Krishna
Krishna
willing, we
willing,
will
we'll
have a
all
class
see
in our
again.
house. Krishna willing,
Sure,
we will
Prabhu.
soon have a class in our house. Thank you.
Always when I come to Chennai, I think of two houses. One is that large hall in Kalchakra Prabhu's house, and I always remember sitting there and taking beautiful darshan of the deities. And then I remember Punya Pragna Prabhu's house, and it's so nice, that all of you have stalwart devotees there. And I think Vaijayanti Mala Mataji and Sajan Prabhu are also now in Chennai. So thank you very much for all your association. Keep the fire of your devotional service going, and never bear grudges, not against Krishna, not against time, and never against his creation. There's a time for everything. Hare Krishna. All glories to Srila Prabhupada. All glories to Srila Gurudev. All glories to all the Vaishnavas who assemble. Hari Bol.